Hello, my name is Scott. I work in the Economics Tutoring Center at Arizona State University. Today I'm going to be talking about different types of data classifications. Please make sure to check everything I say with your instructor because definitions and notation may vary. So, as I said, we're going to be talking about different data types. So, typically the breakdown that most people know is that they know that data can usually be classified as qualitative or quantitative. Qualitative has to do with non-numerical data, so a description of something, maybe a type of car is a good one. You can't be represented by a number, it's a name or a word of some sort. And then on the other hand, quantitative data is numeric. Height, weight, those are both quantitative. There's no really other way to talk about them. They are numerical data types. But these can be further broken down, and a lot of times in statistics you need to talk about these smaller subcategories of data. So first I'm going to talk about qualitative data. Usually we break that down into two more smaller categories. So that's nominal data, ordinal data. And so nominal data, I'll talk about that first. The word suggests it has something to do with the name. So a good example like I used was type of car. And what distinguishes it from ordinal data is that there's no meaningful way to assign order to nominal data. So if you're talking about types of cars, you can't order a Volkswagen versus a BMW. So nominal data usually has no order, and it's a name usually. Ordinal data, then you might guess, means that we can assign some sort of order to it. So an example I like to use is customer satisfaction. So on a survey, you might have a question, how satisfied were you with the service? And you'll see very dissatisfied, somewhat dissatisfied, etc., all the way up to very satisfied. And a lot of times those are sort of assigned numbers, so you give a 1 for very dissatisfied or a 5 for very satisfied, and the other numbers fall in between. So there's a meaningful way to order those responses, but they're still non-numerical in nature. Very satisfied is not a number, it's a description. You can order them, but it's still inherently not a number. That's what distinguishes ordinal data from nominal data. And those are typically the main subcategories of qualitative data. We don't really break it down any further. Take a look at qualitative really quick because I'm going to erase it because quantitative breaks down further. There's usually two ways to break it down into two subcategories. So the first way is quantitative data can either be discrete or continuous. And this is probably the most important distinguishing factor that you need to know for a statistics class. If you're dealing with quantitative data, like a probability distribution, you'll want to be able to decide whether it's discrete or continuous. So, discrete data is typically something that can be counted. So if you think like number of children, typically, that's easy to count. The number of children in a family you can typically count on 1 or 2 hands. But even if it's like 20 children, it's still countable, and it usually takes on whole numbers as its data values, typically non-negative whole numbers. 0, 1, 2, 3, all the way up. There's no really limit on it. Again, discrete data is usually non-negative integers, and it's a quantity that you can count. Continuous data, on the other hand, it's not typically, it can be an integer, but if you think about temperature, if you were to measure the exact temperature, it could take on decimal values. So it could be 114.5, it could be 114.3278, etc. It could go on essentially like an irrational number. It could just be a non-terminating decimal, which is different from discrete data because discrete data is typically integer value. which is different from discrete data because discrete data is typically integer value. So probably the easiest way to tell whether data is continuous or discrete, you think about, can it only take on non-negative integers? If yes, then it's discrete. Or can it take on decimals? We usually say it's continuous. Another example that comes up a lot in economics, for example, that confuses some students is money. A lot of students think because money typically exact to the number of cents, dollars and cents, they think it's discrete data because you can count the number of cents. And in some ways, that's somewhat correct, but usually we think of money as continuous data because it can take on such large values, and to 2 decimal places is pretty specific. So, for example, you're not reasonably going to count the number of cents in something that, a sum of money that's over $1 million. It's really kind of too large, and because we can break it down into decimals, we usually say it's continuous. Really, any quantitative data can be classified as one of these, and you just have to watch out for those examples like money that can be a little tricky. So these we typically don't break down any further, but there's another way to break down quantitative data. So the other way to break down quantitative data is interval or ratio data. And again, these are both quantitative, they take on numeric values, but the difference is interval data typically has no true 0 point. So a common example used is temperature. The reason temperature is interval data is 32 degrees is not twice as hot as 16 degrees, even though 32 is double of 16. It doesn't scale in that way. And for example, there's several different scales we can use for temperature. There's Fahrenheit, Celsius, and they both have different 0 points. So in that sense, interval data, there's no true 0, and now temperature does have absolute 0, like 0 degrees Kelvin, but again, with different scales, there are different 0 points. There is a true 0 point, so a good example is height. Something can be 0 feet tall and 0 meters tall are the same thing. The 0 point is the exact same. And 2 feet is twice as tall as 1 foot. So we can double a certain amount actually means something with ratio data. And double is a ratio, so that kind of gives you insight to the name. But there's a true 0 point, we can compare the data in that way, and that's what distinguishes it from interval data. So just to summarize, data can be broken down into qualitative, which is non-numeric data, or quantitative, which is numeric. If we look at qualitative, that can be broken down into nominal or ordinal data. And again, you can go back and review the video for those. And then quantitative can be broken down in 2 ways. We can say it's discrete or continuous, or we can say it's interval or ratio data. So that just summarizes, you can imagine it as a big tree where the branches split off, kind of as I'm drawing it. And it should help, I hope, give you some insight into how to tell apart different types of data. So I hope that helped, and if you have any other questions, feel free to come into the Economics Tutoring Center or ask your professor. Thanks.